Hi, I'm Spike, and I like to talk about nerd stuff. So when we last left off, I talked about RID 2001, aka Car Robots, a show which, depending on what language you saw it in, was either the last in a long line of cartoons continuing the Transformers story which began in 1984, or it was the first complete page-one reboot of the franchise, telling a completely new version of the events of the Transformers with new incarnations of the characters that we know and love from the 80s. Either way, it was the end of an era. But the time has now come to talk about the very first show that was made specifically to be a complete page-one reboot from its very conception. The year is now 2002, G1 and the spin-off Beast era is officially over, and in comes a brand new paradigm. Everything from the designs, the storyline, the gimmicks, and even the ethos behind the toys themselves are totally different from anything we've gotten before. This is the beginning of an era which would later be dubbed the Unicron Trilogy. While RID 2001 may have been my earliest memorable experience with the Transformers, I also said that as a kid I did not tune in to every single episode. But I would be genuinely happy whenever it was on because I thought it was really cool. It was also the very first Transformers show that I ever got DVDs of, although at the time, these were the only ones that they ever actually released, so I only ever watched the same 9 episodes again and again. A problem which I have since solved. Twice. Transformers Armada, by contrast, is the first show in this franchise that I ever saw in its entirety from beginning to end. And it's the first show that I actively woke up and got ready early in the morning on purpose to watch. As a kid, I genuinely enjoyed every single episode of this entire show. For some reason, I seem to have forgotten. From its overarching stories, to its character journeys, to of course, the action. But what caused this sudden swerve from the creative heads at Hasbro and Takara? What resulted in this upheaval? And I once again ask, is the show itself actually any good? Well, the answers to all of those things are surprisingly complex and fascinating. So let's explore the incredibly uneven tale of one of the most divisive Transformers shows ever made, Transformers Armada. Chapter 1. The New Paradigm. Previously, the Transformers in the US and Japan was very different. The American media would often be heavily delayed getting to the Takara side of the markets, and the majority of the Japanese animated shows never made it in any kind of official capacity to the Western shores at all. These shows and specials that we never saw at the time were Scramble City, Headmasters, Super God Master Force, Victory, Zone, Beast Wars 2, and Beast Wars Neo. Wait, it's Beast Wars 2nd, isn't it? God damn it. All of which were continuations of the original Generation 1 cartoon storyline. Even the shows made in America would be translated extremely differently, with Beast Wars being turned into a complete joke, replete with ad-libbed comedy and improvised jokes throughout its run. But after the failure of the Beast Wars Neo toy line in Japan, and the disastrous reception of the Beast Machines show and toy line in the West, Hasbro and Takara were both struggling to even keep the Transformers brand alive in their markets. So it was decided that Hasbro and Takara collaborate closer than ever before, creating brand synergy across all media. To fill for time while they planned for this new paradigm, the final show and toy line from the Takara side, Car Robots, was brought over to the West as RID 2001. Which was a shockingly massive success, with a toy line that expanded far beyond the limited run of the show. Speaking of Transformers shows, which I love despite knowing that they're not that great, Transformers Armada was the first result of this new, close partnership between the two companies, with the lore, visual style, and even philosophy of design and function within the toys being entirely different from anything that the Transformers had ever done before. A central gimmick of larger robots combining with the tiny robots, Minicons, unified this entire arm of the brand, and the story across various media surrounding Armada, or Legend of the Microns as it's known in Japan, was the search for these Minicons, with Autobots and Decepticons competing to see who can collect the most Minicons, thus winning the war. And look, I know a lot of people compared this with Pokemon, but for me the comparisons have never really worked and have always been extremely shallow. Yes, I know, the Transformers are going around the world trying to find these guys, but the actual plots and handling of this idea is absolutely nothing alike in its execution. There were problems though. On the toy side of things, while several great and classic figures were produced at this time, such as Tidal Wave, Megatron, and the great big centerpiece of the line, Unicron, many Armada toys were simply not good, sacrificing the progress that several previous toy lines had made in function, design, and articulation for pure gimmickry. Most of these figures were heavily compromised, some outright ruined by the one neat trick that they can do, which would usually be amusing for perhaps 5 minutes before you realize that what you'd essentially bought in many cases is an ugly brick that you can't actually do anything beyond its one major feature. And if that feature happens to be kinda lame, then what you end up with is just a really lame toy. The other issue is the American version of the anime was incredibly rushed to meet a deadline, airing essentially unfinished. The dub script would be completely screwed up, frequently misinterpreting, badly translating, or completely rewriting the story in ways that made the show way more nonsensical.
Thank you for your help, Leader One. I could not have beat them without you.
Dialogue would often end up having complete non sequiturs, and even the voice actors would often get confused. Listen to poor Scott McNeil trying to figure out what the hell this line is even supposed to mean.
There you are, hotshot. I'm sorry for being late, but better late than never, right?
Give the kid a break, Jetfire.
What about me?
Hell, literally the first words of this show annoyed the crap out of me as a kid. The show opens with a several-minute exposition monologue telling us the entire background of the Transformers and their war without a hint of subtlety. And the first 2 words of it were wrong.
Light years ago.
I mean, for goodness sake, I knew watching this for the first time at the age of 8 that was wrong. And while the animation on the Armada version definitely got better later on than it began, it still would air essentially unfinished right up until the end. Let's just compare this shot of Unicron from Armada with the same shot of Unicron from Unicron Legend, and you'll see what I mean. But in the latter episodes of this show, these were reduced to mostly minor issues, rather than the early episodes where literal storyboards and mangled animatics would appear prominently in the various episodes. Now, the impression that you might have gotten over the years if you've only watched Armada and have read random Reddit posts and Twitter threads is that the difference in animation quality between Armada and Unicron Legend is drastic. You might have even built up an image in your mind of some spectacular and staggeringly different look for the entire show. Well, the reality is that this is almost entirely false. While the biggest and most glaring animation, dialogue, and story problems are solved by switching to the sub rather than the dub, in the vast majority of the show, there is no difference at all visually speaking. Animation errors and mediocre shots are very commonplace in both incarnations. Now, while I'm not going to get into every single difference between the original Japanese story and the US dubbed version, I mean, you could just visit TF Wiki and find out just how different the shows are episode by episode if you feel like it. There are several genuinely interesting changes, especially later on, which will make the Japanese version an overall better show, with better animation for certain scenes, and dialogue and character motivations which are far more consistent and better written. Oh, and for the record, because we're dealing with 2 versions of the same show, I'm going to change the names of the factions and characters, so when I'm talking about Legend of the Microns, I'll use the Japanese names like Convoy, Hot Rod, Sandstorm, etc. But when I'm talking about Armada, I'll use Optimus Prime, Hotshot, Cyclonus, etc. Oh, and if you're not aware, in Japan, for some reason, the Autobots are called Cybertrons, while the Decepticons are called Destrons. These name changes between the 2 different versions of the show will make it a lot easier to make comparisons later on. Yeah, speaking of, that is one of the weirdest elements of this show. Between the Western and Eastern versions of it, the names got changed. Not all of the names, just most of them. Megatron remained the same, as did Unicron. Now, Convoy makes sense. Japan has always called Optimus Prime Convoy, and obviously, Hasbro wants to keep the more iconic and marketable name Optimus Prime for the West. But Hot Rod got changed to Hot Shot for some reason, even though Hot Rod is the name of a prominent and well-known character in the franchise, whose character journey is pretty similar to Hotshot in this show, while Hotshot had only previously been the name of one random unimportant background character from the last Japanese import. He was so unimportant, in fact, that I didn't even mention him in that video once. This guy got renamed Red Alert in the American dub, but was originally supposed to be Ratchet. Considering that in the Japanese version he's meant to be an old-timer with a bad back and is the main medic on the team, calling him Ratchet makes a lot more sense than Red Alert. Now, this isn't a real complaint or anything, I really don't mind the name changes. It'll just lead to a lot of dub mistakes when the English translators either forget or don't even bother to change the name as they should. A few instances exist, for example, of renaming Hot Shot to Hot Rod by accident.
Hot Rod is an amazing vehicle.
Starscream calls his minicon Swindle Grid, and a ton of times they accidentally call practically every minicon in existence Grindor. It's like Grindor was the placeholder name for when they hadn't actually gotten around to fixing the dub yet, and they didn't get around to figuring out what minicon should have what name before the show had to go out. Well, all of that background covered, let's take a proper look at this show. Hi everyone, this is 2026 Spike talking. This video was meant to come out a really long time ago. I recorded the original audio for this well over a year ago. In fact, I think it was about a year and a half ago in 2024, long before I did the videos on Robble or the Wild King. Between then and now, I have had tons of in real life issues, art projects, other commitments, etc., which have prevented me from finishing this one. The editing of this has taken an incredibly long time on its own for various reasons which I will be getting into. Hence why I released a couple of much shorter videos ahead of this one, despite the fact that they really should have come after this one. Still, here we are. The video is finally done. Only, well, there was a ton of stuff that I either forgot to mention or criticisms I only decided to remark upon after I'd already finished the first version of this video. So if you see the video go black and white again and my audio sounds really weird, it's because those bits are me now cutting myself off from 2024. And also deciding to interject stuff in hindsight. Another thing that I feel the need to address is the footage. See, I don't have the majority of Transformers Armada on DVD, because to my knowledge, it has never been released in full in Region 2. There are copies available on Amazon, but they're only in Region 1. But I don't actually have a Region 1 DVD player, so I was kind of stuck with whatever footage I could scrounge up from the internet, which meant generally low quality rips from whatever site happened to be hosting them. Not the best option. But then I found a YouTube channel called Magnus After Dark, which had HD versions of the entire show along with several others. So for a huge number of episodes, I grabbed footage from their uploads. Unfortunately, the longer that things went on, the more I realized that the Magnus After Dark footage was bad. See, they had used AI to upscale the footage into 4K, but unfortunately, that AI pretty obviously was working from the same kind of low quality, bad sources that I was using initially, which it then tried to clean up. Only this AI doesn't know what the picture is actually supposed to look like, and it has no clue how to make something actually look good. So we end up with shots like this, which obviously looks pretty horrible. So at some point, I got really sick of looking at these AI upscales, and out of desperation, I made a post on my Blue Sky page bemoaning the situation, and at complete random, one of my moots over there, that's Transcoded Titan, mentioned that they had ripped the episodes from those Region 1 DVDs of the show. So finally I had some decent footage to work from. Only I'd already done so much editing on the first half, and it had taken so long and it was a lot of work, that ultimately I just decided to leave it as it was with the footage from Magnus After Dark. So starting around the halfway point or so, the footage on screen is going to look pretty radically different with a slightly lower fidelity, as the rips from Transcoded Titan are in something like 340p if I remember right. Still, I would honestly rather have that than the really bad looking AI upscales which make so many shots look like a blobby mess, especially when the original animation for Armada was already a blobby mess. Now, despite the problems I have with it, I would still like to thank Magnus After Dark for the footage that you'll see in the first half of this video, and a huge, sincere thank you to Transcoded Titan for the clips that you'll see in the second half. Anywho, back to me from 2024. Chapter 2, A Rough Start. So, Armada is kind of a show split in 3 pieces. There's the first part of the show, which is some of the most mediocre kids entertainment that you have ever seen, where very little happens, and most of what does happen isn't very interesting. But then there is the middle portion, where the show started focusing a bit less on marketing toys and single episode plots, and much more on ongoing character drama and development. And then there is the most famous and well-remembered parts of the show, starting from episode 39, where suddenly everything gets a hell of a lot more dramatic and impactful. Real stakes start happening, and it ramps up into one of the most incredible finales to a Transformers show to date. So, let's start this discussion properly by discussing the huge initial stretch of the show with episodes 1 to 30. Hi, 2026 Spike here again. Something that I didn't mention, which I'm going to talk about more extensively when it comes to Energon, is that every single show in the Unicron Trilogy is 52 episodes long, and they aired over the course of one single year each. Meaning that the animators had to get these episodes out every single week of the year without fail. Now, I've actually had to draw Transformers myself for things like art commissions and little animations over the years, and I can tell you from personal experience that these character designs are hard to draw just for a still image, let alone having to draw them frame by frame for 22-minute segments 52 times in a row to fill out an entire year. To put that into perspective, Transformers Animated, which was only a few years later, likewise struggled to keep its animation consistently good. And it only had 42 episodes in total over the course of 3 years. Add to that the fact that, ever since the days of Osamu Tezuka, Japanese animation studios are well known for having their animators be underpaid, overstressed, overworked, and under extreme time crunch under normal circumstances. I cannot imagine the absolute hell that it must have been to work on this show, which looks to have had a worse animation budget than RID 2001. Which already looked pretty ropey at times, and also clearly stretched its budget pretty thin. Back to me from 2024. The opening 3 episodes introduces us to the idea that the Autobot-Decepticon conflict was, at least partially, driven by a third party, the neutral faction of Minicons, small robots which contain the huge energy that nobody quite understands. All the larger robots do know is that combining with the smaller robots gives them a massive boost in power. The more Minicons that you can combine with, the more powerful that you become. So the Decepticons' campaign of total conquest over Cybertron got new fuel. Both the Autobots and Decepticons were using Minicons as weapons, pawns in their fight. So when it was realized that neither side could ever truly win the conflict, being too evenly matched, the Autobots and Decepticons formed a peace treaty, and the Minicons were shipped off so that they could live their lives in peace, only to accidentally crash land on Earth's moon. The discs, which contained the Minicons as digital data, were scattered across the Earth, where the vast majority of them sat dormant for 4 million years. Oh, Transformers, it's always 4 million years with you people. Now this made a hell of a lot more sense in the original version, where it was the Cybertrons who originally gathered the Minicons up and put them on the ship to protect them from the Destrons. You can even see the Destron ship shooting at the Micron and Cybertron ships, while the Cybertrons are obviously trying to protect the Minicons. It removed the Destron's big tactical advantage, and that meant that there was no peace treaty until after the Microns were sent off-world. So of course Megatron would go after the Microns in that version. Their removal from Cybertron wasn't Megatron's choice, and he didn't sign a peace treaty with the specific stipulation of sending them off-world. By contrast, in Armada, Megatron and Optimus both agreed to not use the Minicons anymore, and formed a truce so that they didn't annihilate each other. And if both Autobots and Decepticons agreed to this as the correct move, then who the hell is dropping bombs on the Minicon ship? And why are there Autobots and Decepticons fighting each other during its departure? There's a serious disconnect between what's being shown on screen and what the narrator is telling us. This kind of issue is exactly what made Armada so frustrating at times. If the dub hadn't been so mismanaged thanks to rushing it so that it would hit the airways to coincide with the toy line hitting shelves, I imagine that problems like this would probably have been fixed. Either way, in the wake of the Minicon's departure, apparently the Autobots and Decepticons just kind of sat around with an uneasy but apparently pretty stable peace for millions of years, with each side just ruling one half of Cybertron. To put that into perspective, the human race has only existed for roughly 200,000 years of our planet's history. Cybertron attained and maintained peace for about 20 times longer than Homo sapiens have even roamed this planet. You gotta admit, that's pretty impressive. Unfortunately, after all that time, some human kids, Rad, Carlos, and Alexa, found some of these discs, touching them and awakening the Minicons within, which sent a signal to Cybertron that the Minicons had been found. Megatron and his Decepticons arrive on Earth to take them, followed by Optimus and a small team of Autobots. Again, in the Japanese dub, this made more sense. The war only ended because the Cybertrons themselves prevented Megatron from getting his hands on them. But in Armada, Megatron and Optimus agreed not to use them for the sake of preserving Cybertron, and so that they wouldn't annihilate each other's armies, since they were perfectly evenly matched. So this doesn't even really make sense in Armada, unless of course Megatron is just bored of peace and is looking to take control of this tactical advantage now that so much time has passed, which, okay, well I guess I'll give that to Armada as an explanation, even if it does work better the other way. The first wave of toys, characters, being Optimus Prime, Hotshot, and Red Alert for the Autobots, and for the Decepticons it's Megatron, Starscream, Demolishor, and Cyclonus. By the way, am I the only one who thinks that the name Cyclonus actually makes way more sense for this guy than the Generation 1 character? You know, Cyclone, it spins like the rotors of a helicopter. I don't know, I just think it works. For these early episodes, the vast majority of them are just the Autobots and Decepticons fighting to get Minicons. It gets very stale and repetitive very quickly. Sometimes I'll have to market a new toy, so new characters will appear to correspond with the release. So in Wave 2 you get Autobots like Smokescreen and Sideways and Sideswipe, and then there's Decepticons like Thrust and Scavenger, and the biggest brute in the show, Tidal Wave. The real issue of this first run of 30 episodes is just how plotless it is. Very little especially interesting stuff actually happens in here. However, I will admit that there are a few episodes that I do have a soft spot for. For example, there's the episode Carnival, which is not focused on the Decepticons at all, and is instead a fun little side story about Minicons run amok in a, well, carnival. There's not much drama. The Decepticons sit this entire episode out, and Megatron literally spends most of this one just taking a nap. I'm not kidding. Then there's Jungle, which is a Find the Minicon episode, but it's also one where we get to see the Autobots sacrifice their chance to get a Minicon so that they can be heroes and put out a forest fire. I like it when the Autobots actually get to be heroic and do something noble, even if it ends up with some kind of loss for them. It reminds us why they're the good guys. It's good to have them do stuff that isn't just punching or shooting Decepticons. Besides this, we also learn of the most powerful Minicons in existence. 3 trios who can all combine in different ways to make incredible weapons of vast magnitude. These weapons are the Star Saber, not that guy, the Skyboom Shield, and the Requiem Blaster. These 3 weapons will be massively important right up until the end of the show, and for some reason, they all also become completely irrelevant once the next show starts up and totally forgets what the Minicons are and why they were a big deal for 52 episodes. But that's obviously the subject of the next video. Besides the occasional one-off charming episode or lore drop, sometimes something does actually happen, like someone switches sides, like Sideways is revealed to have never been an Autobot and defects to the Decepticons. What's really funny about this is that whenever the Autobots come across Sideways after this, they always yell "traitor" to him. Like, no, he's a double agent. He's not a traitor to you. you, he just lied to you and you guys fell for it. Anyway, the Autobots also had their own double agent. Like, Scavenger is revealed to have been an Autobot double agent right after this, which admittedly does make some sense. He had been acting odd for several episodes, including acting almost as a mentor to Hotshot while he was still wearing his Decepticon badge. I just find it really funny that the Autobots get all mad and up in arms about Sideways turning out to be a Decepticon double agent when they had a double agent. Interesting side note about this is that in Legend of the Microns, the Scavenger equivalent, Devastator, actually was a Decepticon who defected to the Cybertrons out of a change in idealism, rather than always having been a double agent. Personally, I find that more interesting, but in the end it's something of a neutral change regardless. Episode 23, Rebellion, is an especially interesting episode in this run though. It was the first real hint in the show of what kind of character Armada Starscream is. At first glance, it seems like your typical Starscream fights Megatron for leadership and loses type story. But unlike the kind of lame attempts at this in G1, which I was never really a fan of, here there's actually more at stake and much more drama and character to it. While usually Starscream's characterization doesn't tend to go much further than being hugely egotistical and treacherous, wanting power and glory, specifically wanting to usurp Megatron's place as ruler of the Decepticons, what's revealed here is that Starscream is far more an honorable and noble figure, wanting to fight Megatron as he's an uncaring ruler who frequently demonstrates his lack of care for the well-being of his soldiers, and potentially his inability to hold to the ideals of the Decepticons. Armada Starscream is an overall loyal Decepticon. Megatron here even says that he cannot win because he always plays by the rules. Starscream simply disagrees with Megatron on his philosophy of leadership. This episode ends, and rather than Megatron punishing or mocking Starscream for his act of attempted insurrection, he allows Starscream to continue under him, and not out of foolishness or randomness like his Generation 1 cartoon counterpart, but rather because of his own sort of honor code. And that he knows in this incarnation, Starscream isn't really the type to randomly stab him in the back. Starscream will fall in line and do as he's told, until such time as Megatron is either an insufficient leader or betrays the ideals of the Decepticons. Or will he? We'll have to see further. I should also mention that this episode is the first to establish that Sideways clearly has an agenda of his own, sending reports up to some being or entity that we do not know. It's he who orchestrates Starscream's betrayal of Megatron. We follow that up in episode 24, Chase, which also features Sideways connected to a greater entity. The kids, Carlos, Alexa, Rad, Billy, and Fred, good lord, the human cast in this is ridiculous, find themselves in the digital realm and are chased around by Sideways. Towards the end of this episode though, some vast and terrifying beast of incomparable evil makes itself known. Unfortunately, while this thing is a pretty terrifying image in itself, and the sound design especially makes this thing sound like the most haunting and ancient being in the world, it also spoils way too much way too quickly, as anyone even slightly familiar with Transformers will recognize this as the Dark God of Chaos itself, Unicron. And from there, well, you can pretty much figure out what Sideways' true loyalties are. The other side of this is that the episode itself just isn't that great. The human kid characters in the show are easily the most disposable and pointless ones in the entire franchise's history, and they mostly waste a lot of the audience's time and test our patience. So yeah, this episode is sort of good setup for much later plot stuff, but it's just not an interesting story in its own right. Episode 25, Tactician, introduces us to Thrust, a Decepticon who is known as the greatest tactician on Cybertron. Only he really isn't. And as the show goes on, Thrust becomes a bigger idiot with every passing episode, eventually going from this serious voiced straight man to being this total goofball with a squeaky voice who's just kind of useless to everybody. It's not a slow transition either. It's like he just got bonked on the head one day and gained an entirely different personality. He is also someone who'll become a lot more important later on in the final arc of the show, eventually. The next big development is in episode 27, Detection. It's It's here that Sideways is finally revealed to everyone that he was never truly a Decepticon or an Autobot, but instead is devoted to some third party who threatens both sides. It's not exactly revealed what he wants, but from here on out there is no pretense and no going back. Sideways is out on his own, enacting some scheme that none of the rest of our cast fully understands. He's also revealed to have powers and capabilities beyond anything we've ever seen from a Transformer. His body contorts and reshapes and regenerates in ways that seem almost mystical in nature, not to mention very creepy. And that's kinda it for the first 30 episodes. Some interesting stories, some fun moments, but despite these aspects, the majority of this arm of the show is just kind of painful to sit through. There's just this malaise of mediocrity running through this entire run, usually adequate and fine to have in the background, but often devolving into being downright awful. The aforementioned animation problems really don't help though, especially in the US version. It does get better as it goes along, but even the good episodes get weighed down by several frustrating flaws. So it's time to move on to Chapter 2, wherein things get better. Episodes 31 to 32, the two-parter Past, are some of the strongest episodes in this entire show, and that's for a lot of reasons. They tell an extremely compelling and well-realized plot with character drama, heart, and stakes, which propel this show very suddenly and jarringly from a generally okay atmosphere in the first part to being genuinely a compelling narrative, one which would run through the rest of the show. It's also the best story which revolves around the introduction of new characters, rather than just dropping them into the story unceremoniously like Thrust or Smokescreen. Most of them are given a real reason to be there, and a strong plot to get the audience engaged with what's going on. The first new character of the episode is Sideswipe, who the entire cast, even the humans, make fun of and insult by calling him weak, clumsy, and generally stupid.
I promise not to get in your way, Commander, sir.
You already are.
Wait, come back, Commander.
He's the weakest Transformer I've ever seen.
He arrived on Earth specifically seeking out Blur, one of the new Autobots who'd been added to the cast. This brooding, gravelly voiced loner guy.
Oh, brother.
I like him. Apparently Blur actually saved Sideswipe once when he got tangled up in some cables back on Cybertron during the Armistice era. This seriously affected Sideswipe, as nobody in his entire life had ever gone out of their way to help him like that in any way, shape or form. And apparently he'd fallen in with a bad crowd, whatever that means. But when he saw someone selflessly help him without asking for a single reward or even a thanks, it gave him the kick in the teeth that he needed to turn his life around. It's here where we basically say goodbye to Blur for this two-parter, because he's basically irrelevant from this point on, since what began as his story is for some reason then transferred to Hotshot, as Blur point-blank refuses to have a partner, especially one as useless as Sideswipe. So Hotshot ends up taking the responsibility of showing this dude Dingus the ropes. Only Hotshot himself isn't too hot on the idea of having a partner either, especially after the last time that he had one didn't go too well. It's revealed that Hotshot was once partnered to a fellow Autobot named Wheeljack, who, for some reason, and no one seemed to be able to figure out, is a dead ringer for Generation 1 Sideswipe. Even toy designer Aaron Eisenberg isn't sure how that one happened. Anywho, somehow Wheeljack got trapped during a fire, and when Hotshot didn't return to save him, it was Megatron who braved the flames. Wheeljack thought Megatron was there to kill him, but no, instead, for whatever reason, Megatron actually rescues the Autobot, and Wheeljack has been a loyal Decepticon ever since.
Megatron saved me. My life belongs to Megatron from now on.
And you know what? I gotta say, this actually sheds new light on Megatron in my opinion, making him a little bit more grey than his typical depiction at the time. Remember, this was pre-IDW, long before he had the backstory of being a lowly miner who rose up against tyranny, only to himself become the oppressor. And yet, here he is, choosing to save the life of an Autobot simply because he could. It's also one of the rare instances of a previously loyal Autobot Autobot defecting to the Decepticons, not being an especially evil guy, and having legitimate reasons to have both grievances towards the Autobots who abandoned him and a reason to be loyal to Megatron. It is great stuff, especially considering how the show has treated the factions up to this point. This is probably as good a time as any to mention that one of the major toy designers working at Hasbro at the time, Aaron Archer, stated that he and other toy designers were trying to come up with ways of telling the story of each character through their designs. Wheeljack is probably the perfect example of that, since he's got this massive Autobot logo in his chest with a huge gash cut through the middle of it, and a smaller Decepticon logo beneath it. It was one of several attempts at a distinct and memorable design, which worked extremely well, and it also led to his depiction in the show. It's certainly better than the comic, where the only thing Simon Furman could think to do with him is shove him into the background of one shot where he doesn't say or do anything, and the reader is just left to wonder what's up with this random Autobot standing alongside a Decepticon at Megatron's base. Through the episode, Wheeljack continually wants to get revenge against Hotshot for abandoning him, although Hotshot actually reveals that he did go back to rescue Wheeljack, despite the other Autobots holding him back, one of them even smashing him in the gut to keep him from going. But by the time that he did get back, Wheeljack was already gone. Evidently, Megatron got to him first. Still, Wheeljack doesn't care, or he doesn't believe him, and ultimately, it was Megatron who saved him anyway, so it's to him that Wheeljack owes his loyalty. During the ensuing fight, the facility that they're in burns to the ground, and Hotshot manages to rescue Sideswipe, making up for the fact that he didn't get to do the same for his old partners centuries ago. Oh yeah, I didn't mention before, but he was captured by Wheeljack earlier and made into a hostage, bringing the story full circle. Well, almost full circle. I mean, we never did get back to the whole Blur thing. Sideswipe and Hotshot spend the entire rest of the show calling each other brother from now on. The plot, animation, music choices, and even sound design for this episode are incredibly strong, particularly by Armada standards. Past does what the best Transformers media always does. It makes you forget that this is ultimately about selling toys, and instead it puts the story, narrative, and characters first. And it's not even the strongest show in Armada overall. Hey, interjecting here once again. So I was editing this section, looking over the footage again and listening to the dialogue, and I decided that I just couldn't leave some of the major criticisms of the US version left unsaid, because I think it's worth going over at least some of its many problems, which particularly stem from the issue that I mentioned earlier, the ridiculously rushed dub script. Now, the English-speaking cast is doing an incredible job trying to sell the emotions and stakes of the story, but thanks to how badly translated some of it is, the characters keep contradicting themselves. Like, in part 1, Wheeljack says that this isn't about revenge, only in part 2, he basically says that nah, it's totally about getting revenge. He says at one point the Hotshot needs to forget the past and move on so that they can battle his enemies, only for him to go on and on and on about the past, because that's literally the entire point of the story. These things are, again, nowhere near as egregious in the Japanese original dub. The Micron's version of Wheeljack, Rampage, is a much more consistently written character, in that he doesn't come across like a hypocritical schizophrenic. These issues made revisiting past again while editing this section so very frustrating. Most of my compliments still do stand, but generally speaking, you should take any and all of my praise and just apply it to the Micron Legends version and not the Armada version in this case, because the difference really is stark. There's even this extremely poignant bit of dialogue that Rampage has in Micron Legend, where he talks about the endless, seemingly pointless war that the Destrons and Cybertrons have been waging, and how he hardly sees a difference between the two factions now. It actually works incredibly well, and thematically, this whole thing will pay off in the final episodes of Armada. All of that got mangled for some reason in the English dub, which is really disappointing. Anyway, moving on from past now, let's talk about the next thing. Episode 33, Sacrifice, is not particularly amazing, but it did lead up to Starscream's arc for the rest of the show. After being given the Starsaber and being set up by Megatron to distract the Autobot forces away from their base so that the rest of the Decepticons could use their intel the Sideways gave them to find and attack the base in a bid to steal the Requiem blaster, Starscream finds himself suddenly surrounded by Autobots, with not a single Decepticon staying to help him. Feeling like a patsy, because he is, and the sting of betrayal in his side, the next episode contains a shocking twist. Before that though, I should mention something I actually forgot to write down, and that's that Smokescreen ends up getting shot in the chest by Megatron and, well, seemingly dies. Like, everyone treats it like he did, except he doesn't. And this ends up not actually mattering in the long run, because Smokescreen is then rebuilt into a better action figure. He's rebuilt into a bigger and more powerful body, Hoist. So in the end, his whole sacrifice, the thing that this episode is named after, doesn't really matter. From episode 34, Regeneration, for several episodes, Starscream joins the Autobots and forms strong bonds, especially with the humans, realizing that he actually wishes to defend and preserve the Earth. Now, this initially started because Starscream was so frustrated and angry at Megatron that he was so obsessed with his destruction that he felt the need to leave the Decepticons and join the army that was trying to stop him. However, over the time he's with the Autobots, he forms strong bonds with the humans there and realizes that he actually wants to defend the Earth and its population. In particular, the human that he bonds with most strongly is Alexa. Now, a lot of the fandom has made a big thing out of this, frequently very creepily turning this into some kind of romantic thing, which, guys, is a millions-year-old alien robot and she's literally an underage girl. Can we please just not? This plane sucks, and I really wish I had never come across this particular subset of fans. Episode 36, Mars, is also not amazing, but it continues this arc with Starscream as he and Jetfire, along with the Minicons who form the Starsaber, go to the title planet in search of a Minicon who somehow wound up there. It also contains perhaps the most infamously poorly translated moments in this entire show.
I don't need your sympathy. Now leave me alone. Even the Minicons have abandoned me now.
The Japanese version of this is obviously similar, but there he was just telling the Minicons not to coddle him. He didn't actively tell them to piss off before getting upset that he actually did. Anyway, the main thing to come out of this is this odd rock from Mars, which Starscream gifts to the humans. Alexa carves a pendant from the rock, which she will wear around her neck for the rest of this show. This arc of everyone in the Autobot team slowly learning to trust and appreciate Starscream, and his slow realization of the difference between serving under Megatron and serving under Optimus Prime eventually came to a head in episode 37, Crack. The Autobots are still not completely sold on working with Starscream, and Starscream in turn is getting increasingly aggravated that the Autobots keep treating this conflict less as a war and more of a scavenger hunt, where their priorities are on protecting the innocent rather than actually killing Megatron. The main reason he joined up, after all, was to take Megatron down, not because he suddenly agreed with the Autobot cause. The humans, however, have decided to throw Starscream a surprise thanks for the rock party, presenting Starscream with his first and only entirely altruistic gift that he has ever received, a hand-stitched polishing chamois cloth made specifically for him. He's legitimately moved by this, as he's not used to any form of kindness from anybody. Despite this, and the trust that Optimus Prime places in Starscream in a crucial battle against the Decepticons, in a somewhat less than shocking twist, Starscream abandons the Autobots, steals all of the Minicon Ultra weapons, and brings them to the Decepticons as a peace offering for his return to the fold, after some prompting and manipulation on the part of Thrust. This episode, and the show in general, makes this a big deal too. Starscream is not entirely happy with his decision. This act of joining the Autobots, only to eventually defect back, will have reverberations until the very end, and the Autobots certainly will not forget this. And unlike Sideways, the sense of hurt and betrayal that the Autobots feel over Starscream actually means something, because they had to learn to trust him after several episodes of development, giving him chance after chance, only to be slapped in the face like this. The last shot of this episode is the chamois that the humans made, shimmying crying in the wind, ditched by Starscream as he rejoins the Decepticons. Side note, before moving on, this episode is also the one where it's made official that Thrust has joined whatever faction Sideways is aligned with, and that the two of them are working together to perpetuate the Autobot and Decepticon conflict, something which will continue to be important later. Episodes 38 and 39 regard a weapon which has been built up for several episodes, made from combining the sheer power of the three legendary Minicon mega weapons, the Hydra Cannon, a weapon capable of annihilating an entire planet. Man, those Minicons are really packing quite a punch if only 9 of them combined are capable of pulling off that kind of stunt. It makes you wonder just how powerful they'd be if more of them joined forces, or even, perchance, all of them at once. Before using the warp gate to teleport up to Megatron's ship, Optimus establishes for Hotshot and the audience the Autobot Matrix of Leadership, a relic from the original Transformers, Optimus calls it. He states that it contains the minds and wisdom of all the creators who wore it before him, which of course has been the Matrix's deal ever since 5 Faces of Darkness in Generation 1. He tries to hand it over to Hotshot for reasons which aren't entirely clear, seemingly fearing that he won't be coming back from this mission, but Hotshot refuses, unwilling or unable to take on this responsibility. Anyway, a power-linked Optimus and Jetfire end up flying up to the Decepticons' now fully armed and operational warship, just as Starscream is ordered to push the button which will destroy the entire Earth, in a test of loyalty from Megatron. Starscream struggles with this, knowing that Megatron will kill him for disloyalty if he refuses, but also feeling the guilt and weight of the innocent lives who will be snuffed out should he obey, as Optimus and Jetfire fly up to destroy the weapon. The ensuing fight between Optimus and the Decepticons, in particular Megatron, genuinely is one of the stronger ones in the show to date. It's not full of stock footage like certain fights in the show, and there's a real tension as the fate of the entire Earth is at stake should Optimus fail. Also, completely at random, the animation switches up towards the end of this episode and suddenly looks staggeringly good for this breathtaking sequence, where Optimus uses the power of the Matrix to shield the Earth from the Hydra Cannon blast. Visually, musically, and in its pacing, this entire scene of Optimus saving the Earth is one of the best moments of this show. So it's a good thing that Hotshot didn't take the Matrix from Optimus in that earlier scene. Otherwise the entire planet Earth would have been completely screwed, and the Decepticons would have won the war just in time for the coming apocalypse. This, incidentally, was the very first time that as a kid I saw Optimus Prime die in a piece of Transformers media. I hadn't watched the movie yet, and wouldn't for another 2 or 3 years. And I have to say, with the way that this episode handles it, it still impacts me now. Even though I know it'll be undone a few episodes later, the way Optimus Prime's body turns bleach white and his face mask cracks loudly before his entire body disintegrates, well, it really hits me hard, followed by the genuine scream of horror from Jetfire at what just happened.
No! This can't be happening! Optimus!
Even Megatron is moved by this, hardly even able to process what just happened.
He's completely disintegrated into space dust. Optimus!
Crisis is a great episode, easily the coolest and most action-packed in this phase of the show, with an ending which will make first-time viewers genuinely intrigued at the direction that Armada will take from here. Episodes 40 to 41 are largely plotless, but in this case, it's not actually a bad thing, at least in my opinion. After the massive impact of Optimus Prime's death, these two serve as a cooling-off period and a transitional point between the old show and what is effectively an entirely new show. These two episodes focus on mourning Optimus Prime, episode 40 is even called Remorse, and finishing the construction of the Autobot ship, the Miranda. I have no idea why it's called that, by the way. Weird that they wouldn't just go with the Ark or something. But then I think that they called the Minicon ship that, or was that the Axelon? I don't know. But it seems like a really random name to me. Episode 41 largely focuses on Rad and the other kids debating as to whether or not they'll join the Autobots for their launch off-world to Cybertron. And I have to say that this is by far the most idiotic and insane aspect of this show. Look, I've hinted towards it, I've made a few comments here and there, but I haven't really talked much about the 5 human characters in this retrospective, and there is a reason for that. Rad, Carlos, Alexa, Billy, and Fred are the most useless group of human characters ever to grace the entire Transformers franchise, and that That is saying a lot. Every single one of these kids is utterly shoehorned into the plot with no real purpose. They add nothing of substance, and they don't even have interesting plots whatsoever. Almost nothing they ever do is something which couldn't have been done by an actual Transformer. Look, I know it's popular to crap on Transformers Prime these days, but that show, to me, is kind of the gold standard of how to integrate your human and Transformer casts. Every human in there, Jack, Miko, and Raph, and Agent Fowler, all have distinct and memorable personalities, and their inclusion in various plots through the course of the series almost always feels natural. Like, I know, Miko can get extremely annoying in my opinion with her near suicidal idiocy grating on my nerves, but at least I know what she's about. I understand the appeal, why she's here, and she does contribute positively to several episodes. I understand why someone might like her. Now, Jack Darby can be a little bit flat sometimes, but he's got fantastic standout moments in this series, which I still remember over a decade after watching this series. Even Koji, a character that I mocked in my first review on this channel for being kind of annoying and largely superfluous to the plot of RID 2001, contributed far more substantially to that series than any of the human characters in this show. It doesn't help that there are 5 of these little idiots running around, and the writers can't think of a single interesting thing for one of them to do, let alone 5 of them. And now that the war is officially leaving the Earth, and the humans now have 0 role in anything, or even a purpose in existing at all, the Autobots are all too happy to drag these human children to Cybertron, where a war of domination and genocide is happening. Holy crap, this is stupid. Oh, and what do you think the contribution is going to be, huh? What do you think these humans are actually going to do with the majority of their screen time? Why, they're going to stand around on the veranda and comment on things.
Times like these call for large quantities of comfort food.
I just want to know if the minicons are still on our side or not.
No! Help me! Oh, it's you, Blur.
You got it.
Hey, you mind explaining what's going on out here?
Hey, wait a sec. It's Unicron. That must be it.
Vaguely gesturing at the plot and lamenting how lame and useless they are for everything.
The Autobots helped save the Earth, and I really wish I could help save their planet. But there's nothing I can do! I want to help out some way, but I can't do anything! I can't stand it!
It baffles me that they are coming along for the ride when I can barely think of any times where their presence was wanted by the audience or needed by the characters. I swear, these kids are the reason why so many millennials like me hate when human characters get involved in Transformers stories. Anyway, rant over, moving on now. This is where we hit our final stretch, and where the 3rd distinct chapter of Transformers Armada finally happens. This is the shortest, but definitely the best of the 3. Chapter 4, The Unicron Battles. After the 2 mellow episodes, the final one set on Earth, the plot picks up again in episode 42, Miracle. This episode, to me, is the true beginning of the Unicron Battles arc. Now, technically, the previous episode, Depart, was the first one in the series to use the title, The Unicron Battles, but it really didn't have anything to do with that, and this is the first episode to actually have a character utter the name Unicron.
What's wrong?
Enemy.
What?
Unicron.
Unicron?
The episode begins with a mass number of minicons appearing out of nowhere and flying towards the Autobot ship as they are attempting to catch up to the Decepticons. Noticing that the Autobots are actually gaining on them, a very dismayed and bored Megatron orders the Decepticons to destroy the Autobots. But it's made clear that his heart just isn't in it. For all 3 episodes following Optimus's death, Megatron has been sullen, seemingly caring very little for his war of conquest now that Optimus no longer challenges him. In an odd way, this foreshadows the finale of the series. Megatron despises Optimus. The mere existence and presence of the Prime infuriates Megatron, and yet there's this odd camaraderie and kinship that Megatron feels towards Optimus. He misses Prime, mourns his sudden passing, and hardly knows what to do with himself. It's almost a relief when, at the end of the episode, the Minicons use their power to enter the core of the matrix of leadership and combine their strengths to restore restore the Autobot commander to life. Megatron, for his part, laughs, genuinely elated that his old enemy is finally back. Miracle could perhaps be seen as a cheap episode, not to mention that the Deus Ex Machina of the Minicons having this power to revive Optimus is a bit of a stretch. However, I think that the episode sort of earns it, even though there is a better way of doing this, which I will get to next episode. For one, it was established several episodes prior that the Matrix contains the consciousness of all the primes who had previously held it. It's also known to be an artifact of immense power, and the Minicons themselves, for reasons which will later be explained, are also near mystical entities who wield significant power of their own, especially when combining their energies. So while I can understand why people might not be a fan of it, personally, I have always liked this episode. Episode 43, Puppet, was for an extremely long time the only TV show appearance of a really cool concept, Nemesis Prime. And unfortunately, the execution here is really bizarre and lame. Everyone settles into the reality that Optimus has finally returned, just in time to find themselves and the Decepticons pulled into a mysterious hole in space, which takes them in orbit around a bizarre techno-organic world full of mechanical trees. This weird artificial place is home to a dark and twisted version of Optimus's visage, Nemesis Prime. Nemesis kicks the asses of both Autobots and Decepticons, seemingly being completely indestructible until the Minicons reformat, aka repaint, a bunch of the Transformers there, boosting their power enough that with all their power combined, including the Minicon mega weapons, and Optimus Prime power linking with Overload, a character who's totally always been here and wasn't just shoehorned in at the last minute to sell a toy, shut up, annihilate Nemesis's body, revealing it to be, as the title suggested, a puppet of Sideways. The planet starts crumbling to bits, and the Autobots and Decepticons retreat. Oh yeah, and for some reason, Megatron decides at random that he's now called Galvatron. This to me really sticks out as being stupid, because all that's changed is his colors. There's a minor thing where he seems to think that he's stronger now, but there's really no evidence that that's true. He just felt like being purple meant that he should change his name, I guess. Small point here. Megatron doesn't actually change his name in the Japanese version. He remains Megatron throughout the entire show. Literally all that changes is that he is now purple. The only reason that I can imagine the US dubbing team feeling the need to change the name is that it's a marketable name to collectors and fans, which made justifying selling the new repaint that little bit easier. Except that they didn't change any of the other characters' names when they got repainted. Like Armada Hotshot didn't suddenly start calling himself Hot Rod or something. They just did it with Megatron to Galvatron because I guess that's just a traditional thing that happens when Megatron gets an upgrade, even if that doesn't make any sense here. But don't worry, they'll only do this 3 times across the entire Unicron Trilogy, and also once before in RID 2001. It was a dumb trope in all 4 of these shows, and I'm so glad that we're past this. So here's where I interject with something that really bothers me that could have fixed a few issues with the previous episode. I think that this episode should have been before Miracle. I mean, think about it. Optimus is dead. Even Megatron is mourning him. And then the Autobots and Decepticons find themselves with a twisted, broken mirror image of the Autobots' greatest leader, only to have to defeat it. It'd make great psychological warfare to use this image of Optimus against the Autobots, at least if he's dead. Plus, at the end of the episode, I'd have made it so that Nemesis's body would have been left over, and the Minicons would be the ones who insist on bringing the husk on board the Miranda. We wouldn't really know why, but then the next episode would come in, and the Minicons pull the same trick that they did in episode 42, bring Optimus's spark out of the Matrix. Only this time, they have an actual body to put it in. Heck, this was at the same time that Optimus got a new repaint, a dark-colored, red-eyed form, just like Nemesis Prime. The pieces fit incredibly well, and I am flabbergasted that nobody on the writing staff thought of this. From here, several episodes are basically a massive setup to the appearance of Unicron. The tensions ramp up and the stage is set. The build-up continues to grow ever more dramatic as the Autobot-Decepticon conflict rages harder than ever before. When we finally reach Cybertron, I think this is the first time in this show that it actually feels like a war. There are casualties being discussed on both sides of this conflict, as Decepticons try to push their advantage. This isn't a show where the Autobots and Decepticons make silly jokes as they punch each other over minicon discs in a desert anymore. This is a conflict with stakes and purpose, as the characters start to realize that everything that they have fought for was essentially meaningless in the face of a larger and more terrifying foe than any of them have ever conceived of, who, as it turns out, has been pulling their strings since day one. Episodes go by as the Autobots continue to press for peace, but the Decepticons refuse to relent, Galvatron especially. Even when warned of the threat of Unicron to all Transformer life, at first refuses to believe in the threat and then insists that he can handle it without the Autobots' help. Eventually his plan is simply to kill Optimus, absorb his entire army into his own through force of arms and threats alone, and then take on Unicron. All the while, Starscream continues to feel less and less secure in his place among the Decepticons, more convinced of Megatron's folly and the threat that Unicron poses, and the uselessness of continued war. Episode 45 Dash is a particular favorite of mine. Hotshot, in a desperate bid to get Galvatron to listen, arms himself to the teeth with weapons, storms into the central Decepticon stronghold on Cybertron, and eventually, humbly, begs Galvatron for a chance at peace. It's also in this episode where Thrust is finally revealed to Galvatron to have been a traitor this whole time, stealing the minicon components of the Hydra cannon and announcing that his true allegiance is to Unicron. In the wake of this, only the Starsaber is left with Galvatron. Remains with Galvatron, as the Requiem Blaster and the Skyboom Shield are taken up to Unicron. This episode is action-packed and stuffed with plot and character, with Hotshot treated for once as a serious character, if somewhat naive, desperate to make Galvatron see reason. The next episode, Drift, is a weird, trippy, and kind of difficult to follow episode, not helped by the dub that really screws with the translation even worse than normal. It's here where we finally learn what the minicons are and where they came from. They are the spawn of Unicron, created to serve him and inflame the conflict between the Autobots and the Decepticons. Now, they're not inherently evil just because of their creator, and that is an important point that the show does bring up, however much power that the Dark God may have over them at times. It's also revealed that at the very least, Highwire was partially granted proper consciousness and a soul thanks to Rad, through some really nebulous and murky reasoning which doesn't entirely make sense. And here comes what I feel is the single best episode of Armada. Perhaps the shining moment of the entire Unicron Trilogy, episode 48, Cramp. Perhaps the most famous aspect of the entire series, and in my opinion, a massive reason as to why this show is still beloved despite all of its flaws. Cramp is the culmination of Starscream's journey. 25 episodes of this show, almost half of its entire run, led to this moment. It's also the conclusion of all the episodes wherein the Autobots and Starscream have been trying to get Galvatron to see reason and join forces with them. Here, Optimus has proposed an armistice, insisting a ceasefire is needed to discuss the threat of Unicron, which could be the end of them all. But Galvatron does not acquiesce. He starts yet another fight as Optimus implores his ancient enemy to finally see reason throughout. But it's all for naught. Galvatron is intent on killing Optimus and taking his army, only for Starscream to literally come bursting in, challenging Megatron one last time, ready to finally end their rivalry. The animation on the fight between Starscream and Megatron ranges from pretty good to decent in the American version, although as usual the Japanese release is much improved. What's really important, and what's stuck in the minds of the audience, is what Starscream is doing this for. Galvatron thinks in terms of power and force. He needs a demonstration of strength and a dramatic example to witness firsthand. So while Starscream demonstrates his capacity to win this fight, he chooses to throw it on purpose, letting Megatron run him through with the Starsaber. Then he hits Megatron and the audience with the most dramatic and impactful moment of the entire show, and one of the most emotional character deaths in all of Transformers. Power linking with his Minicon swindle, Starscream unleashes a furious attack on Unicron, the sheer raw power looking like a devastating assault. Clearly enough to kill any normal character in this show, only for Unicron to send one single blast down, causing immense pain to anyone in the vicinity and utterly disintegrating Starscream, leaving nothing but a crater and his sword. To make things seem even more helpless, that massive blast from Starscream, it doesn't even reach Unicron. It simply, pathetically, dissipates long before it hits its target. But even if it had reached Unicron, it hardly would have left a scratch. In the aftermath of Starscream's death, Alexa's pendant, made of the Mars rock that Starscream had left her, shatters, and she watches from the window of the Miranda, shedding tears for what she knows, somehow, has happened. Starscream's final words echo in Galvatron's head as he looks on.
I tried to gain favor from you, but nothing was ever good enough. No matter how many battles I fought, you always found fault. Then I saw how Optimus treated his men, and I realized he was a leader of integrity, unlike you.
Finally, Galvatron sees what must be, reaching a hand out for Optimus, who accepts, only for Sideways to come out of the shadows, stealing the Starsaber from Galvatron, the last Minicon superweapon that he needs for his master, Unicron. This episode is wonderful. It is well written, the pacing is great, and the animation during the most important scenes within is truly amazing, outshining the vast majority of the show. I am so glad that, for at least this moment, everyone on the team seemed to know exactly where to pull out all the stops to make this a fantastic showing. The following episode deals with Cramp's aftermath, showing the Decepticons and Autobots aligned at last against their common foe, their armies unifying to finally take on a dark god. The combined armies of the Autobots and Decepticons simply aren't enough. But Optimus and Megatron, and the human kids, for some reason, make their way inside Unicron to find his core and destroy him before he destroys Cybertron. Before they do though, Galvatron takes the time to confront Thrust, who's been standing on Unicron's shoulder, not realizing that he is not a really big player in these events, and that Unicron really does not care about him, especially now that he's basically done any useful thing that he ever might have done. Galvatron's confrontation leads to Thrust's ignominious defeat, as he's trapped in some mechanical workings, crushed to death, as Galvatron gives a brief, badass speech, not even taking the time to look at this pathetic excuse for a Decepticon. Anyway, from there, Optimus and Galvatron make their way inside, and the internals of Unicron are genuinely really creepy. Unlike the '86 movie, which depicted Unicron's insides as metal walls and robot inner workings, Armada shows a more gooey, disturbing, fleshy insides, like he's not really a robotic being so much as he is a living organism inside a metal shell. Given the fact that at this stage, he's canonically supposed to be the physical manifestation of an ancient primordial god, I actually think that kind of makes sense. After battling through the internal defenses of Unicron's weird, squishy, organic-seeming body, Optimus and Galvatron, followed by the main Minicon trio and the kids, find their way into Unicron's beating heart. There they find Sideways. Within Unicron, held in his grip, it's made clear to Optimus and Galvatron that Sideways never really existed, that instead he and Unicron are one in the same. Unicron expands upon what we learned about the Minicons several episodes prior. They aren't just creations of Unicron, they are part of Unicron, his spawn, made to further add fuel to the rage, hatred, and conflict between the Autobots and Decepticons. Unlike previous incarnations, this Unicron doesn't merely feed by eating planets. This Unicron is sustained by rage, madness, and war. He is sustained by conflict, some kind of mystical consumption.
For eons, I've absorbed energy from your battles with Galvatron, which has allowed me to grow into the most formidable entity in the cosmos.
Unicron has laid dormant for millennia, growing ever stronger here by absorbing the negative emotional energy of the Transformers and their war. He didn't have to do much to perpetuate this conflict. The Autobots and Decepticons did it for him through their own self-destructive means. Optimus and Megatron, along with every other Cybertronian who are currently fighting him, are inadvertently making him stronger simply by continuing their conflict. Unicron even mocks Optimus's assertion that he fights for peace.
How foolish to battle in the name of peace. How absurd.
Including that he was programmed for war from the start, and while Optimus denies it and strives for a world where such things are no longer necessary, somewhere deep inside, he knows that he is at least partially to blame for this situation. Though I would personally argue that it's much more Megatron, since he's fighting against a despotic fascist here. In the American version, Galvatron complains a lot at Unicron until he wraps up the despot in a bunch of tentacles to shut him up. Meanwhile, in the Japanese dub, Megatron is increasingly enraged and wants to fight more, which actually makes Unicron more happy, as all he's doing with his rage is feeding the Chaos Bringer with every bit of fury he has until he is fully absorbed. Oh, and also, completely at random, Optimus's color scheme just kind of changes for some reason, and it goes completely unexplained and not even really discussed in the episode. His eyes even change color from amber to red. This is another thing which kind of makes more sense in the Japanese dub, since they make explicit reference multiple times to the inherent goodness of the Matrix within Optimus's chest is the one thing which makes him different from Galvatron. Unicron spends a massive amount of time trying to convince Convoy to give in to his darkest impulses, surrender the Matrix, and join Unicron. It's Unicron's corrupting influence which changes Convoy's body. In the Armada version, Unicron is simply saying that Optimus's fight has always been pointless and mocks his millennia of war. And Optimus suddenly has a black color scheme now for basically no reason. Well, except that Hasbro and Takara really wanted to sell this Power Links repaint. So of course they gotta shield the new toys, even if it's just the old toy with a new paint job. Okay, so this is an even later addition to my interjection script here, but I was doing the very last bit of editing on the final 2 episodes of Armada, where I compare Micron Legends to the American version, and I realized that somehow I had missed a detail while discussing it. For whatever reason, in the American version, there seems to be a coloring error, where Optimus has his Power Links toy colors, well, minus the red face mask, but whatever, while ensnared in Unicron's tendrils. But in the Japanese version, he has his regular classic Optimus Prime colors. I have no idea why this change was made. Now, I had to go back again and just compare the two to make sure I wasn't going crazy here, but yeah, he gets his dark colors much earlier in the Armada version than Micron Legend, but only by a matter of minutes. Because at the end of the scene with Unicron, and in the final episode, Convoy gets his dark colors. But there's no actual explanation. My entire speculation that he got his dark colors because of the corrupting influence of Unicron seems to be wrong. Like, I could swear that I thought I'd read something in the subtitles and just like it had gotten an explanation in the Japanese version, or at least some kind of hint in the Japanese version as to why this was happening, but there isn't one. There's no explanation. It just happens. He's just got dark colors now. That said, there kind of is something in expanded lore stuff which might explain it. See, there's this comic from a company called 3H Productions, and in that comic it involves Unicron, and it was being published around the same time that Armada was airing on television. And in that story, it turns out that the resurrecting Unicron has some kind of evil virus thing that he can infect people with, which changes their color scheme into edgy, dark, weird versions of themselves. And that's called the Unicron virus, and it's like trying to corrupt the sparks of the Transformers that get infested with it, and it is a thing in the lore which was happening around this time, and I can only assume that from a lore perspective, that's what's happening here. Except that definitely isn't the thing that's actually happening here, because at no point, anywhere, At any time does the dialogue say this or suggest it. Anyway, that's the end of the interjection for this bit. There's going to be one last interjection towards the end, and that will be it. As the Minicons try to fight against their creator, he exerts his will over them, basically turning them into the very weapons that they were always designed for, annihilating a ton of the forces against him. It's now that finally the humans actually prove useful. They're pulled into some kind of mindscape similar to what they had been earlier in the show, and actually manage to break through the control that Unicron has over the Minicons, once again finally turning them against their Dark Maker once and for all. With the Minicons resolving to remain completely peaceful, Unicron loses all power over them. With his hold over them lost, they devastate him from within, even destroying Unicron's heart. The sudden loss of energy and the damage done to him in the wake of it seems to massively affect Unicron, and he's made at last dormant, seemingly defensively beginning transformation back into planet mode. In the final episode of this series, Mortal Kombat, yes, I know, obvious joke, Galvatron decides to settle his dispute with Optimus once and for all, in one last fight. As far as Galvatron is concerned, they simply cannot continue as they are. There has to be a single supreme commander. They can't both rule at each other's side, especially with the ego that Galvatron has. Besides this, well, Unicron is sustained by the anger and hatred between the two of them, right? So if they both remain, then this whole thing will just start up again. So in a weird, roundabout way, Galvatron has a point. The humans try to convince Galvatron that he's wrong, but he won't have it. And in the American dub, he even refers to Starscream as a fool for his sacrifice. This is, as you guessed it, another bad change from the dub. In the original, Galvatron doesn't say anything about Starscream being a fool, nor about it being impossible for Cybertrons and Destrons to live in peace. Rather, that this is about settling the feud between himself and Convoy, so they don't just throw away the character development that Galvatron had in the wake of Starscream's death. He merely wants to win against a bitter enemy now that their mutual foe has been destroyed. Though he's wrong about that, Unicron isn't actually dead, but he doesn't know that yet. This fight has gone down as one of the best in Transformers animation history. The entire thing is beautifully animated, and for once, there's basically no difference between the US and Japanese versions. The only major things I could find were some minor color variations in a couple of shots, and this one bit where Megatron rips out his own cannon, which was previously wrecked and made useless by Convoy. In Armada, this thing was just an indistinguishable blur which was being thrown at Optimus, and we didn't actually get the shot of him ripping it out. So we didn't actually know what this was. I'm not completely sure why this got cut. It's just a few seconds long, so it's a really weird choice. Regardless, as a kid, when I got the DVD set of the best episodes of Armada, it included this one. So I revisited this episode over and over again. And when YouTube became a thing, I clicked that one up multiple times because this fight is so cool. Genuinely the single best battle in the entire Unicron trilogy for how well animated and choreographed it is. Hell, it's not even just a fight either. There's plenty of characterization in every move. Plus, there's enough tension in between blows where the two just talk and catch their breath. Galvatron is absolutely reveling in this fight, laughing and commenting about what a great time he's having, reliving the good old days when he and Optimus would just brawl it out on a regular basis. And this is even more enhanced than the Japanese dub. It's implied, although not outright stated, that this battle is also reinvigorating Unicron, which makes sense. As an audience, we get to see all of this play out as Unicron continues his transformation, and the combined Autobot-Decepticon Armada continue their assault. Ultimately, Optimus and Galvatron find themselves in front of Unicron's gigantic maw, unable to battle any further. And here is where, finally, I can give the American dub and dialogue far more points than the Japanese version. Now, in both versions, Optimus is barely holding on, as both of them are being pulled towards Unicron's maw, and Megatron/Galvatron tries to convince him to let him go, before cutting through his own tank treads to sacrifice himself to destroy Unicron. However, in the Japanese dub, Megatron states that perhaps the two of them sought the same thing, ranting about how he sought darkness whilst Convoy sought the light, basically a self-admittance that he's evil, I guess. And when he cuts himself free, he screams that the light always casts the shadow, i.e. that Optimus's goodness will make evil happen just by its existence, and that evil exists for eternity before dying within Unicron. Armada, by contrast, makes Galvatron just that little bit more noble. In this dub, Galvatron is talking about how their battle must finally come to a conclusive end, that as long as they both exist, Unicron will continue to be a threat. Thus, with Optimus in a better position to survive, Galvatron sacrifices himself, declaring that victory is finally Optimus's, and asking him to look after his men as they need him. Yeah, it's a rare thing for me to side with Armada over Legend of the Microns, but in this instance, I greatly prefer the nuance to the overly evil cackling of the Japanese version. With Galvatron destroyed and the millennia-spanning struggle finally ended, Unicron seems to warp out of existence, its threat to Cybertron finally over. The US dubs state that both Unicron and Megatron vanish forever. Yes, he says Megatron, I guess they forgot to translate that bit, and we're left with the impression that the Decepticons and Autobots finally have attained a lasting peace. Well, we'll see how well that goes in Energon. Final thoughts. Now, I can't sit here and pretend that Armada was overall a great show, as much as I really want to. For the older fans at the time, the fact that so much of it sat at this extremely mediocre level for so long, often dipping into downright terrible territory, well, it left a bad taste. The over-reliance on a stupidly big cast of largely useless and frequently annoying human kid characters, as I have said, it really didn't help. Did we really need Rad, Carlos, Alexa, Fred, and Billy? Especially when, among all the human characters, Fred and Billy especially did not contribute a single thing, even by these characters' standpoint. Alexa at the very least had the role of providing an emotional link with Starscream, forming as part of his arc, but she didn't exactly have one of her own. Carlos didn't have much of a reason to exist either, besides being a friend of Rad, and Rad is such a blank slate I literally couldn't tell you one personality trait that he ever exhibited. With that said, while Armada was an extremely rough show through much of its run, I can't claim that it doesn't have its high spots. The final 12 episodes certainly left a huge impact on the fandom, even to this day. With Starscream's sacrifice, the Autobot-Decepticon alliance, and one of the best and scariest representations of Unicron as seen to date, and the final episode, Armada seriously left its audience on a massive high note. I dare say that its final arc is likely why the show is beloved by a certain subset of fandom, myself included, or at least the ones that stuck with it even through its early and extended low points. The animation wasn't always great, or even competent. The voice cast would often get strained to try and make its dodgy scripting sound convincing. Its translators were under the gun to get it done as fast as possible to meet impossible deadlines, which led to major mistakes and even brand new plot holes exclusive to the English version, and massive inconsistencies. Its early run was overstretched, stuffed to the brim with pointless and shallow filler. But in the end, the series still left an overall good impression with the kid audience that it was designed for. And for good reason, given the better stories that it left us with compared with its early days. It's not perfection. In fact, you could say that it's downright awful. But this, along with another show that I'll talk about in a couple videos' time, well, this is my Transformers, and it will always hold a special place in my heart for that. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Hi everyone, so as promised there is one final interjection from 2026 Spike here, because I really wasn't happy with how short my conclusion was and how I seemed to kind of rush through it. I mean, one of my least favorite things in media analysis is when like 99.9% of a video is just summarizing the plot and then the reviewer just goes, well, I thought it was okay, or I thought it was bad, or I thought it was great, and doesn't really expand on those things, especially in the conclusion. It's become one of my biggest pet peeves, and I kind of call it channel awesoming, is the only best way I can really describe it. So this is my best attempt to try and bring more of a conclusion to this video. Now, I mentioned before in this video that this show was, for whatever reason, given 52 episodes which had to air every single day of the year, and how ridiculous I felt that was. and how I felt that that contributed to it having some of the worst animation mistakes of the franchise, along with the US version making things even worse by airing an even more unfinished version of Armada. But my question is, did this show have to have 52 episodes? Maybe there's some kind of Japanese or American contract thing which was enforced at the time, or some kind of expectations that I really don't know about, but I don't think so. There are plenty of Japanese shows for kids from this era that don't have 52 episodes in a single season. And there are even more shows from America which don't have anywhere near that many episodes either. Now personally, I think that was just a bad mistake from the start. Like, I mentioned Transformers Animated, but before this, Beast Wars, which I'll remind you was using fairly experimental animation for the 90s and boldly going forwards with then new CGI tech, hardly used at that scale before, had 26 episodes in its first season, and seasons 2 and 3 only had 13 episodes each. And it still managed to market its toys very effectively. Beast Wars saved the Transformers brand, remember? It didn't need to fill every single week of an entire year to do that. It had the same number of episodes as Armada did, spread across 3 years. So I have to wonder why the Unicron Trilogy shows, all 3 of which were very clearly struggling to maintain their budget and animation quality, needed this ridiculous timescale. Along with that, I can't help but wonder just how much better this show would look, how much improved dubbing and scripting there would be if it wasn't forced to stretch itself so thin. It certainly wouldn't have had nearly the amount of painful filler in the middle. But with all of that said, the fact that Armada was able to engender so much affection from the young audience that watched it, such as myself, and have a legacy worth preserving and revisiting in the future, with toys and cameos and revisited character designs for various pieces of fiction, which was welcomed with open arms so many years later, really says something. For all of its flaws, and it has many, Armada struck a chord. In my opinion, this show really was instrumental in keeping the brand alive. Now, RID 2001 certainly did its part too. I'm not taking that away, nor am I taking it away from the 2007 Transformers movie, which launched this brand into the stratosphere. I don't actually think the fans give Armada the credit it deserves for keeping that torch lit while it did. It's an important part of the Transformers history, and one that I believe is worth remembering and appreciating. And that, my friends, is Armada, a deeply flawed classic. Well, that was a lot. So I'm still planning on doing videos in the future which are about Energon and Cybertron, but along with those I'm also working on videos about 3H and Fun Publications, and a major development happened there because I actually got to interview a couple of my favorite writers of all time who did a ton of work on those stories, which was extremely exciting for me because I never expected that to happen. So stay tuned, maybe subscribe if you want, give a like on this video, and hey, leave a comment on Armada if you grew up with this, or if you didn't. Let me know what your thoughts were, and if you thought I covered everything well, or if there's anything that I screwed up or missed, then let me know that as well. I actually do appreciate when people tell me that I missed something or messed up. There were a bunch of things on that last video, RID 2001, which I either forgot or mixed up or just got wrong in general, and I did appreciate the folks who were sort of fact-checking me a little bit. I do appreciate that. So yeah, stay tuned for future videos. I'm trying to get better with every upload. Sorry it's been so slow since the last one. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.